Hello, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Let me know if you can hear me. I'm going to be very careful about how close I get to the microphone. And I have a cup of tea with me. I'm warning you in advance because we had an incident last live stream when I was too close to the mic and people heard things they weren't supposed to hear. So I'm going to try and be a bit more careful today. Look, you'll see as I go to sip my cup of tea, I will turn away from the microphone. Avoid any unwanted, unnecessary ASMR and not lose any subscribers in the process. How's everyone doing? How you all doing? This is kind of not last minute, but kind of recently decided that I was going to do this live stream. Didn't give you guys much notice. I think I put it in there this morning. I'm glad everyone can hear me. Greetings, everyone. I don't know if that's Raleigh, or Rail. It's funny, Raleigh. It sounds like Yoruba, but it isn't. I know a Raleigh who's Nigerian, but not Yoruba. I think they're Irobo, if I remember correctly. But let me know if that's Rail or Raleigh. But how you doing, Dominic G? Macy, good to see you as always. Solomon, how's it going? Clicious One, Darth Skywalker, Zehoven, Maureen, SGM, and Healing Waters. How's everybody? Wildflower, thank you for joining us also. Hope everyone's really, really well. Now, Elijah, what's going on? Yeah, feel free, jump in, say hello. You know, we'll do the formalities before we get going. But this one, I'm hoping this live stream won't be very long. I know I say that a lot, but actually I've been quite good and quite disciplined in not making my live streams too long, or at least where they don't need to be. I think the last one I did, I targeted 1.5 hours and it went quite well. So we're certainly being a bit more consistent. Well, I'm not going to promise every live stream is going to be short. I think some live streams warrant a long stream and a long investigation. But some live streams don't need to be long. This is one of those that doesn't need to be too long, but I think it's really interesting because this, once again, as it does, once you're in this space and you decide you're going to become an independent researcher in this space, and you start to become familiar with the wiles and the tactics and the sly little fabrications of the Eurocentric community, it becomes really easy to spot them. So I was minding my own business. It might have even been this morning. I was minding my own business this morning. And obviously your algorithms on your Google or whatever it is you're using starts to get a bit more au fait with your tastes and the kind of things that you like to see. So I get a lot of, anything to do with reconstructions and stuff like that, discoveries, archaeology pops up on my feed. And this new latest reconstruction popped up on my feed. And I was like, oh, cool. They've done a reconstruction. And straight away, I was reading the headline and I was like, okay, this is some BS. But let me read through it and let me see what's going. And the more I read, the more I was astounded, as you guys will be too, as we kind of go through it, at the conclusions they've drawn and how they've come to them. And this is going to be it's going to be somewhat similar to, I don't know how many of you, in fact, here's a bit of an exercise. There's 53 people currently online. So this will see how much my community has evolved. Who was here for my Fayum hoax live stream? So who was here when I did a live stream? It was a little while ago now, must be at least 1.5 years, I think, about the Fayum hoax, about basically the mummies in the Fayum, how basically they're a big hoax. And we covered some of the reconstructions, this, that, and the other. Wildflower, you were here. Joe Bailey, you were here. Zehoven, you were here. So a few of you, okay, that's cool. A little handful. Jar bless, how you doing, Mika? If you were here, let me know. Macy, I feel like you would have been there. Musicologist, yeah, you were there. So a few of you. were there for that Fayum hoax live stream, and you're going to see some of the same tactics. Macy says she might have been. Enoch Select, how you doing? Were you there as well? Fantastic. I'm not gonna. I think maybe you're quieter, or you've changed your name, Enoch Select, because I don't recognize the name. But if you were there, fantastic. It was. Yeah, you've been there for a long time. Anyway, hi Patrina. The point I'm making is that many of the same tactics that we saw them employ for those Fayum mummies, you're going to see a repeat of those things here. And one of the things I've realized is that Eurocentrics, and I'm going to use the word Eurocentrics because I've used it, I think, in the title of the video itself, but I'm going to be very straightforward and say this is Eurocentrism. This is absolutely what it is. This is actually the definition of Eurocentrism, because Eurocentrism is basically the insertion of Europe by means of whiteness into parts of history where they don't belong. That's my definition anyway. So this is the insertion of Europe. I know that obviously historically Europe wasn't white, but we're going to say the insertion of Europe via whiteness into parts of history where they do not belong. Okay, and that's my definition of Eurocentrism. And this, to me, is Eurocentrism 101. Now, am I saying that anybody who's kind of taken part in this new reconstruction or this whatever's taken place is a particularly bad person or nefarious person or even deceptive person? Absolutely not. Because Eurocentrism in academia is very much like white supremacy in society. It's a machine. And sometimes people participate in it and are none the wiser. Everything is set up to support a Eurocentric outlook in the same way that everything is set up to support the upkeep of colonial states. Okay, so, and the status quo of racial hierarchy. So we see that in society, and Eurocentrism is just the arm of that reaches into academia and archaeology. Yeah, so that's all it's about. And this is what you're going to see here. It's going to be laid very bare. It's going to be made very obvious. And hopefully, after we've gone through it, you'll see why I've decided to do this video. Okay, why at least I've had to do this video. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of like the bit of the intro. We've got 75 people live. It's Sunday night, and I don't want to go on for too long, so I'm going to dive straight in. Okay, once again, I'm going to turn my back again because I've got to take a sip of tea. All right. Who's ready to get going? Let's get going. This is going to be fun. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I encountered, and I'm going to essentially read through the article with you because it's important that we paint a very clear picture as to exactly what has taken place here. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the article. I've kind of got a summary. In fact, let's just read through this. So the latest in Eurocentric historical propaganda. Okay, I spelled propaganda wrong. I always do. I always say proper. It's proper, isn't it? Proper propaganda. It's a propaganda, isn't it? It's a propaganda. All right. So anyway, sorry, let's start. All right. So latest in Eurocentric historical propaganda. Let's go. Now, one of the things that you'll realize about when they do these reconstructions and they release them is that reconstructions rely on the media. Okay, this is really, really important. The entire industry of reconstructions rely on the media. When they release these reconstructions, they rarely release them on peer-reviewed academic journals. It's very, very rare that they will do that. The reason why they do that is because the entire industry of reconstructions is about creating false racial narratives, and they know that the process they use will not hold up to academic scrutiny. They know that. Even within their own echo chamber Eurocentric world, the processes are normally so bad and so poor, they're aware of that. So what they do is they release these press releases, And as a result of that, all of the media outlets, and when I say all of them are reporting on this story, by the way, all of the major news outlets, like usual, will pick up and clamor for it and post it, because then there's no one's going to be held accountable for that. This could be wrong, like they always are, proven to be wrong. Could be a complete and utter fabrication, fuzzy logic, poor application of the data, stuff that's made up, some crackpot theory. But it doesn't matter, because all they've done is done a press release. They just made it, did a press release, and it was the papers, the media that run with it. But meanwhile, everyone who's reading these articles thinks they're getting the cutting edge in academic and research processes. And as we read through the article, you're going to realize exactly how deceptive these people are. Okay, so let's go through this together. I'm just going to read this important line from this article, and then we're going to read the article together. And it's not very long, so don't worry, it won't take too long. So it says, peering into the eyes of the past, Reconstruction reveals face of woman who lived before Trojan War. Okay, so they're bringing Troy into this. Okay, for the first time, we are looking into the face of a woman from a kingdom associated with Helen of Troy. Okay. Anyway, let's carry on. So straight away, you can see the attempted deception here, because most people in their glassy ways will just read the article and they'll just see Helen of Troy, and then they'll look at the woman and go, "Oh, look, we know what Helen of Troy looked like." And then it goes on. Here's where it gets even more. Yeah, Helen's sister, Clytemnestra, I don't know. That woman was queen of Mycenae in legend. So the way they've gone on to Helen's sister, they've got, oh, everyone, 9 out of 10 people go at that point, oh, this is Helen's sister. Wrong again. There's no reason for why they mention that other than the fact that she was queen of Mycenae. And from where the poet Homer imagined the Greeks of the Trojan War setting out. Such digital reconstructions persuade us that these people were real. Now, what they didn't mention in that little excerpt that I've taken out is that these these cadavers, these skeletons, or these skeleton fragments were found in Mycenae around the time of the alleged Trojans. That's it. They weren't Helen of Troy, no one Helen's sister, nothing like that. They just found some cadavers in Mycenae. The whole mention of Troy is was it Red Robin, they say? When something is just false and they can just do it to get everyone's attention. It doesn't need to be mentioned. They don't even need to mention Troy here. But this is a part of the deception. They want people to associate Troy, and the Trojans with this face. And now the question is, how did they come up? Red herring, thank you. I said Red Robin. Thank you, Wildfly. It's a red herring. They're just throwing it out there to deceive people because they know most people will not read. But that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to read and we're going to see how veracious these claims are and this article is. So let's go into this. Let me pull the article up and we're going to get right into this. So I'm just going to pull this onto the screen. Let's do a bit of reading. Like I said, this won't take long. Okay. Except tool. And I'm just going to read. So, peering into the eyes of the past. And by the way, to be clear about this, guys, I don't need to. There's loads and loads of articles. I only need to read you this one. This one I'm reading is from The Guardian. The reason I don't need to read you any of the others because they all have exactly the same article. Because like I said, these articles and these archaeological news pieces are really just giant press events. That's all there is. Someone out there with the connections is able to release them as press releases, and the entire mainstream Eurocentric media will gobble it up like the regurgitated bird feed that it is. But let's go through together. Digital technology. Now notice here, digital technology, making it sound like it's all whoa, digital technology. Okay, so basically everyone is carrying digital technology in their pocket. All right, that's not really even a thing anymore. But anyway, digital technology reveals incredibly modern royal who lived 3,500 years ago in kingdom associated with Helen of Troy. Okay, once again, pure red herrings. And here's the reconstruction they came up with. How did they come up with this? Don't worry, we're going to find out. Let's read. So she lived around 3,500 years ago. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to make it a little bit easier for those of you who want to follow along. There we go. So I've zoomed in a bit. I don't know if that makes it a bit easier. She lived around 3,500 years ago, but facial reconstruction technology has brought a woman from late Bronze Age Mycenae back to life. The woman was in her mid-30s. Bear that in mind. Mid-30s. She looks like she's 16. But anyway, we don't need to go on. Kirsten Dunst up there clearly looks like she's 16. In fact, Google 16-year-old Kirsten Dunst. I bet you looks exactly like this girl. But anyway, let me carry on. The woman was in her mid-30s when she was buried in a royal cemetery between the 16th and 17th centuries BC. So this is a long time ago. Okay, 16th and 17th century BC. We're talking about somewhere around the 16th or 17th dynasty of ancient Kemet, yeah, before the new kingdoms even kicked off here. So this is, we're going back some time here. The site was uncovered in the 1950s on the Greek mainland of Mycenae, the legendary set of Homer's King Agamemnon. Now, once again, the mentioning of these historic characters is deliberate because once again, they're trying to give you those associations, these ethnic associations, trying to give you this idea of everyone in the area looking like this person. Now, Dr. Emily Hauser, a historian who commissioned the digital reconstructions, told The Observer, "She's incredibly modern. She took my breath away." Now, let's be very clear about who Emily Hauser is. And don't worry, I'm not going to start, SHITing on Emily Hauser. That's definitely not my intention. But we need to be clear about who this is. Okay, because she's allegedly commissioned this reconstruction. Okay, so normally when it comes to the commissioning of reconstructions, there's normally either some kind of museum that's linked to it or some kind of archaeological team. Okay, let's read about Dr. Emily Hauser just really quickly, because I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to be mean about her. She hasn't done anything wrong. But Emily Hauser is a British scholar of classics and a historical fiction novelist. She is a lecturer in classics and ancient history at University of Exeter and has published 3 novels in her Golden Apple trilogy. Now, incredibly talented woman, I'm sure. Yeah, 3 novels, probably really good novelist. But she's not an archaeologist. Yes, she has a doctorate in history, but it's a weird place to come in terms of the commissioning of reconstructions. Now, my point is that it doesn't even need her presence here. The presence of this woman is to give credibility to this being a historical exploit. If this reconstruction artist was just a reconstruction artist, you just said, "Hey, look, I'm just doing this," that would have been exactly the same as him being commissioned by this. Has anyone got a problem with sound other than JC? Let me know. I think the sound should be okay. Let me know, because someone just said no sound, but let me know if my sound's okay. If the reconstruction artist, okay, fine. If the reconstruction artist had gone about this without the go-ahead or the commissioning of Dr. Emily Hauser, it would have made no difference to the outcomes. It made no difference to the inputs. It made no difference to anything that they did. That's just to literally stamp a name on there, someone who has a PhD, without adding any extra quality. Now, obviously, me of all people, I'm not the type of person to go around and say, "Oh, you need qualifications to do reconstructions." I do reconstructions. Okay. So I obviously understand the irony. The point of the matter is they've said that this reconstruction is commissioned. Okay. They've said this reconstruction is commissioned, and this reconstruction doesn't have a commission. Okay. It's essentially a novelist, historical novelist saying, "Oh yeah, I thought it was really nice." That's as far as this commission goes. All right, it's totally useless and doesn't add anything. But let's continue anyway. You now know who Dr. Emily Hauser is. As she says, the historian who commissioned the digital reconstruction told the Observer, she's incredibly modern. She took my breath away. For the first time, and this is the quote that I pulled for you, for the first time, sound like anyone? Sounds like a Dr. Zahi Hawass. For the first time, we will see the face of Tutankhamun. I mean, for the first time, other than the 400 portraits that we have where he's very brown, but for the first time, we see his real face. The face that looks like mine. I mean, that looks like the king. This is where we are again. Sorry, that was my Zahi Hawass impression. Let me know if you thought that was good. Anyway, for the first time, we're looking into the face of a woman from a kingdom associated with Helen of Troy. Helen's sister, Clytemnestra, or Clytemnestra, was queen of Mycenae in England, and from where the poet Homer imagined the Greeks of the Trojan War setting out. Such digital reconstructions persuade us that these were real people. Okay, these digital reconstructions persuade us that these were real people. By the way, real people is Eurocentric speak for white people. Yeah, they're not real until they're Eurocentric. That tends to be the rule. Let's carry on. Hauser, a senior lecturer in classics and ancient history at the University of Exeter, said it's incredibly exciting to think that for the first time since she was laid beneath the ground over 3,500 years ago, we're able to gaze into the actual face. Actual face. That's strong words, isn't it? So by the way she's saying this, we got to be really convinced, okay? By the way she's saying this, we're going to be really convinced that this is going to be an accurate depiction of this person, okay? Of a Bronze Age royal woman. And it truly is a face to launch 1,000 ships. I mean, lovely words expected from a novelist, you know? This woman died around the beginning of the late Bronze Age, several hundreds of years before the supposed date of the Trojan War. So why are we talking about the Trojan War? Why on earth are we talking about the Trojan War if this woman was not born in Troy? It happened before the Trojan War. What are we doing here? Because we're trying to create associations, okay? A digital artist, Juanjo Ortega G, has developed the lifelike face from a clay reconstruction. So just to be clear here, a digital artist. Remember what I've said to you guys about reconstruction all along. It is an art. And these people will come along and they will act like they're working with the most sophisticated science. Oh, you know, we're doing this and we're pulling in the archaeology and anthropology. And this is a digital artist. That's all we know about them. There's no specialism here, okay, in terms of reconstruction work, this and the other. This could just be, no offense, anybody with Photoshop. And once again, people could levy the same accusation towards me. Well, you're just some random guy with Photoshop. But at least I'm transparent with my processes. At least I show people what anthropology I pull in to make these decisions. At least I use the artwork. My whole argument is that, hey, I'm just trying to make stuff that looks exactly like the art. That's my approach. That's what I do. I'm quite transparent about it. We know nothing about digital artist Juanjo Ortega here. Yeah, he's just a digital artist, okay? And he's decided he's going to make a reconstruction. And all of the newspapers, all of the mainstream are following on with it, yeah? They're just following on with it. Let's carry on. Has developed a lifelike face from a clay reconstruction of the same woman. So what he's done is he's developed his reconstruction based on a reconstruction that already existed, yeah? Clay reconstruction of the same woman that was made in the 1980s by Manchester University. Now, to be clear with everyone, the Manchester method of reconstruction was created in Manchester University, as you guys probably have guessed, in the 1980s. So what we're talking about here is the first trial reconstructions that took place. One of them was this woman. Okay, one of them was this woman. And to be very, very clear about that, the whole field of facial reconstruction was developed to benefit Eurocentrism. And you're going to see that. Okay? You're going to see that. So this is not some reconstruction that's been based on new technology, like they're gonna sell. They're gonna sell the fact that this reconstruction, we're gonna come onto it in a moment, is based on new technology, the latest DNA findings, this, that, and the other, blah, 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 blah. We've created a new face. No, he's just gone on, seen an old reconstruction and added some color, some hair to it. That's it. That's all they're doing here. I don't want anyone to be deceived. That is literally all that's going on here. Pioneers of one of the major methods in facial reconstruction. So you guys will know the major methods of reconstruction are the Russian method. You may have remember me mentioning these. You have the Russian method and you have the Manchester method as the two major ones. You also have the kind of digital processes that are coming up used by Cicero Moraes and other reconstruction artists. But they're all based on the same premise. We know this, obviously. Well, this is a very early version of the Manchester method, which really they didn't have the data to figure out what kind of depth. So just to go over really, really quick overview, the Manchester method is the method that uses pinpoints. Okay, so you get a skull, you plot pins all over it, and then based on where the pinpoint is, you set a tissue depth based on an average. Okay, so we've been through this quite a few times. That's the Manchester method. However, when these reconstructions were done, the Manchester method was just started, so they didn't have a lot of data in terms of average tissue depth. So this early Manchester method was just really guesswork. Okay, and we're going to go through that together anyway. Yeah, we're going to go through that together. Now, Hauser, whose book Mythica, A New History of Homer's World, so I don't know, is there a little bit of agenda there? I don't know. Through the Woman Written Out of It will be published next week. So here's a woman whose work is a fictional work, sounds like trying to create, doing world building around Homer's Odyssey, which is interesting because, is there an ethnic agenda there based on this reconstruction? Maybe there is, because Homer's Odyssey is a very generous book when it comes to what it presents in terms of the worldview. We already know how complementary he was of the Ethiopians, how complementary he was of Africans, how complementary he was of Egyptians. So it'll be interesting to see if that's being revised in this fiction novel she's creating. But let's see. Said that the technical developments in forensic anthropology. So let me read this whole paragraph. Hauser, whose book Mythica, A New History of Homer's World, through the Woman Written Out of It, will be published next week, said the technical developments, I'm going to highlight this, technical developments in forensic anthropology and DNA analysis, as well as radiocarbon dating and 3D digital printing, have led to dramatic improvements in reconstructions of the ancient world. Let me make something incredibly clear. This reconstruction used none of those techniques. There was no forensic anthropology. The DNA analysis that was conducted, and we're going to look at that paper in 2008, has got nothing to do with this reconstruction. Radiocarbon dating and 3D digital printing have nothing to do with this. So these are words that she's just said. Now, I don't know if they've taken her out of context or if the press release took her out of context, but the fact of the matter is, this has been said to deceive the general public. Everyone from the general public is going to be reading this article and think that this quote is linked to this face, and they're not. They're not linked at all. That quote is not linked to this face at all. They created this face from an existing reconstruction by slapping some color on it and slapping some hair on it. Nothing about this face, those blue eyes, this ginger hair, nothing about it has got any relation to this. But they know when they put out these pieces, just like when they put out the piece, King Tut is related to 80% of Europeans. Yeah, when they put out that rubbish based on the alleged Y-DNA marker that King Tutankhamun had of R1b, and that being alleged, I say obviously. Even if that was true, it still can't be proven, because obviously we know that R1b is rampant throughout Central and West Africa and East Africa, and obviously the Sahel region. So that is neither here nor there. But the point being that they will run with these headlines and run with this deception, knowing that people will not read between the lines. So this is properly just massive deception going on. Let's carry on. We can, for the first time, peer back into the eyes of the past. The woman had been buried with an electrum face mask and a warrior kit of weapons, including 3 swords that were assumed to be associated with the man buried next to her, but are now thought to have belonged to her. Hauser said, and by the way, the man buried next to her ended up being, oh, I think it comes on to that. Let me not say a spoiler. Hauser said the traditional story is that if you have a woman next to a man, she must be his wife. Facial similarities have previously been noted, but DNA has confirmed that these were brother and sister rather than husband and wife. So we'll come onto this in a bit. This is basically Theta 55 and Theta 58. Those are the basic. They give the names to the cadavers the same way they give names to mummies in ancient Egypt. So this is Theta 55 and Theta 58. Their brother, they ended up being brother and sister. But I want you to see their mummies, because you and I together, we are going to have an entire laugh together today. By the way, this isn't going to be too serious. This is going to be actually hilarious when you realize how little integrity Eurocentrics have when it comes to peddling a lie. There's zero integrity going on here. So, you know, stay loose. This is going to be funny and it's going to be fun. Let's finish this article now. This woman was buried there by virtue of her birth, not her marriage. That tells us a different story about how important she was. Data that is coming out suggests that far more of what archaeologists call warrior kits are associated with women than with men in these late Bronze Age burials, which is completely overturning our assumptions of how women are associated with war. Now, to be clear about something as well, I'm going to probably release a short soon, because I don't think it warrants more than that. But it's about this mummy in ancient Egypt that basically, one second. I want to give you the details of this, proper details. I'm just doing a search through my notes. Can't find it at the moment. It's a bit irritating. I'll probably find it before the end of the live stream. But basically, there's this mummy in ancient Egypt where, when they initially found it, they thought it was a woman. Then they discovered it was a man. Then they changed their mind again and discovered it was a woman who was pregnant. Then they decided she wasn't pregnant. And then they decided she was again. Now, why am I mentioning this to you? Because in summary, a lot of this stuff they're doing in terms of gender, what people were, a lot of it is just purely guesswork. There is so much guesswork that takes place. And this is, by the way, this is after the advent. Well, half of those guesses were made after the advent of DNA. They still weren't sure about certain things. So they kind of purport and they tell you things with so much confidence and so much assuredness that everybody takes it for granted that these people know what they're talking about. But actually, they can flip-flop quite regularly, even in the modern age, about things as simple as gender, which you think would be easy. And these are mummies, by the way. This was a mummy. We're not even talking about a cadaver, a skeleton. Okay, this was a mummy. So always take it with a pinch of salt, whatever it is you're being told, because a lot of this stuff is very, very much, here we go. I'm just going to quickly find this one. So actually, because I'm only going to make this into a short, I might even just quickly show you this now. I'm just going to quickly show you this article, because this kind of illustrates what I'm saying here. So you know that I'm not just making this up, okay? So pregnant, let me disagree. Pregnant, ancient, so this is Life Science site, by the way. Go away. Pregnant ancient Egyptian mummy with cancer actually wasn't pregnant and didn't have cancer. New study finds. The mummy of and this is a 1st century more recent than the mummy we're looking at now, individual found in Egypt was not pregnant and did not have cancer, according to a new CT study. So let's quickly go through this together. An ancient Egyptian woman thought to have been pregnant and dying of cancer was actually just in this. Go away. Go away. Hide player. Yeah. I don't even use this app. What is going on? Oh my God. I will never, ever use the app, just for how rude that was. You know, when an app tries to impose itself on your life, that there has just consigned it to the dustbin of use. I'll never use it. An ancient Egyptian thought to have been pregnant and dying of cancer was actually just embalmed with a technique that mimicked these diagnoses. Research have concluded, settling a 4-year scientific debate. Now, let me just quickly give you the headlines on this. Nicknamed the Mysterious Lady, the 1st century BC mummy was found in Egyptian city of Luxor, ancient Thebes, but was brought to University of Warsaw in Poland in 1826. The mummy was not scientifically studied for over a century. In 2021, experts saw the Warsaw Mummy Project concluded that, contrary to assumptions, the mummy was a male priest based on a sarcophagus. It was actually the remains of a woman in her 20s who was 6.5 to 7.5 months pregnant. Let's carry on. In the first, this website's horrible. Thank you. In the first published study of the mummy, researchers used X-ray imaging and CT scans to identify several bundles of mummified organs in her abdomen. They also suggested that a poorly preserved fetus around 28 weeks in gestational age could be seen in the scans. In a second study, so this is a published study, by the way, published study. In a second study, the research team proposed that the reason no fetal bones could be clearly identified was that the mother's uterus lacked oxygen and became acidic over time, essentially pickling the fetus. And finally, the team suggested that they had found evidence of potentially fatal nasal pharyngeal cancer in the mummy's skull. These interpretations were controversial. However, radiologist expert Sahar Salim told Life Science in 2022 that the Warsaw team failed to identify any anatomical structures to justify their claim of the fetus. Instead, Salim is convinced the mysterious structures in the woman's abdomen may be embalming packs. To settle the debate, a team of 14 researchers, varied expertise led by archaeologists, blah, 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 of the University of Warsaw, studied the mysterious lady and published their findings in the Journal of Archaeology. And that's where they are up to right now. Okay, that's where they are up to right now. I'm just going to quickly say thank you to Jonathan for his $5 donation. He says, so much guesswork. And I'm going to say absolutely. So you've just seen that in the article. How much flip-flopping did you have there? How much back and forth? How much? And yet they say with so much confidence, this is this is that, this person, this is biologically this is biologically that. You have to take it all with a pinch of salt. Yes, they may be experts doing their best. I don't think they're out there trying to deceive people, but you must also take it with a pinch of salt that these people are working with, you know, essentially they are doing best guess work based on what they have, and often what they have is a lot less than what they communicate they have. Okay, what they have is a lot less than what they communicate they have. Let's finish the article now that I've shown you that. This woman was buried there by virtue of her birth, not by marriage. That tells us a different story about how important she was. I've already read all this. She added that archaeological evidence and DNA analysis were allowing the real woman of the ancient history to step out of the shadows. Once again, this has got nothing to do with the reconstruction. The condition of the woman's bones suggests that she suffered from arthritis in her vertebrae and hands, perhaps evidence of repeated weaving, a common and physical wearing activity among women, and one which we have seen Helen undertaken in the Iliad, Hauser said. Once again, bringing that association, Trojans and Troy, where it's totally unnecessary. So this is such a wonderful way to connect real women's experiences to the ancient myths and tales. So essentially, I want you to put this in perspective. The Iliad, 1700 BC. This would be the oldest that ancient history would ever place someone of Indo-European descent, i.e. modern white Europeans. They don't go that far back. They are very aware of that. So the importance of placing a character like this or finding skeletal material like this and then attaching it to the white race is very, very important. Because essentially what we're trying to do here is we're trying to backdate our existence, trying to, as much as possible, push ourselves back into history. And if we can take a very early civilization like the Trojans and put it in everyone's mind that the Trojans were exactly the same as us, i.e. red-haired, red-haired, blue-eyed people, that is a very, very effective piece of propaganda that we've put out there. And this is how Eurocentrism works. Remember, I always say this to people. Eurocentrism is 99% illustration work. That's how they've managed to deceive the world. Pictures and movies. Pictures and movies. Pictures and movies. They just bombard the world over and over and over again. And before you know it, people are like, whoa, I know what they look like. I know what the Greeks look like. They look like Sean Connery. Where do they get that from? Where do they get that from? They obviously get it from the fact that they're constantly being bombarded with these images that have no truth in them. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the article. And I hope you can kind of see where some of the deception lies. We're about 50% of the way through, by the way, because that's not all of it. The article is just really the iceberg above the water. And now we're going to look at the rest of the iceberg below the water, which really is quite shocking. We're going to go into this together now. So how many on? Well, we're nearly 200. We're 200 concurrent viewers. Amazing. Fantastic to have you all, guys. How many likes have we got? Got 100 likes. That's a 50% ratio. So if you're here and you're live with me, hit up the likes so that we get some, you know, so we get a bit of traction going. If you're enjoying the stream, that is, let me know. Okay. That's the article done. Let me pull my presentation back up because we're done with that now. And here is a summary of the deceptions in the article. So this is focusing on the article now, because I think this is quite important to outline. First of all, I mentioned earlier, it's not Helen of Troy, okay? And I don't think they didn't push that, but I'd say about maybe 5% of the people who read the article will assume it's Helen of Troy. It's not. The woman's in her mid-30s, and yet the picture clearly shows someone who's much younger. Once again, that's a small criticism. Maybe they forgot to tell us that they've shown her in a younger age, whatever. Dr. Hauser is a historian and a fiction novelist, not an anthropologist. Okay? And once again, I only say that not because I'm trying to gatekeep or say she's not allowed to do this, but to say her ability to commission the Reconstruction really was moot. You know, she didn't have really an ability to commission a Reconstruction because this is not her area of expertise, and she didn't provide any data that would have helped the Reconstruction process. This is just literally using someone to rubber stamp a fantasy that they want to put out there and they want people to be okay with. And obviously she's a fantasy novelist, so kind of goes hand in hand. This woman's not a Trojan, okay? To be clear, yeah? She's not Clytemnestra, Helen's sister. All things that weren't said explicitly, but were alluded to in the article, things that people are going to take away. I would say around 50% of people who read the article will go, well, they've reconstructed Helen of Troy's sister and she was a white lady. That's what they're going to say based on that article. Juanjo Ortega, once again, not SHIT and then cool, he does his things, nothing to do with me, but he's a digital artist. He's not a Reconstruction artist. Okay. He's not trained in forensics. We're getting no information about his background. He's essentially someone who's skilled at, digital art, like any artist out there. Okay, like myself. Like that's what he is. That's all we know about him. There was zero use of forensic anthropology. Zero. Not some. Not zero use of forensic anthropology. There was zero use of DNA or genetic information in the final Reconstruction. And together, this equates to monumental deception. There is no accident in the way the article has been presented. but they were not upfront or honest about any of this. And we're really going to go into how deceptive the entire practice is as we read through some aspects of the article together, and I'm just going to summarize some key points to you. Can I say a massive thank you to Kimberly, who's given me a $5 donation? She said, TK Choplak quoted Herodotus, where Taharqa challenged Assyria's king to string a Cushite bow like Penelope told the suitors in the Odyssey. Yes, I think I watched that video, and I'm familiar with the Taharqa challenging them to string to pull a bow like the people of Africa, or I should say the Kushite people. I'm familiar with that. I didn't know about the second part. Penelope told the suitors in the Odyssey. Are you saying that he mentioned that, or are you saying that the he was maybe influenced, or no, this story maybe influenced what was written in the Odyssey? I'm not sure what you mean. But yeah, is there something similar to that where Penelope told the suitors in the Odyssey? I'm guessing that's what you're coming to. I'm not going to give a qualitative response on that. It sounds really interesting, but I will put my hand up and admit that I'm not 100% familiar with that. So I'll have to do some reading to catch up with you there. But thank you very much for your $5 donation. You are very much appreciated. Okay. Now let's dive into, so after reading this article, obviously the thing I was interested in was, first of all, okay, I want to see the reconstruction that this new reconstruction is based on. I need to see it. Okay. And I also want to see the results of this DNA study. So those are the two things that I was really kind of like, okay, I need to see these things here. I need to see how they've got from point A to point, A, which is, wherever that is, to point Z, which is this final reconstruction, which they said is a tremendous likeness of the Trojans. Is there any link between the two? Okay. Let me just quickly, I want to just respond to Kimberly here because she is kind enough to, she said, I'd found the parallel interest in Homer's Odyssey. Penelope challenged suitors to string her husband's bow, which they were unable to do. Got it. Okay. I see that. Okay. Yeah. I like that. So potentially there's some kind of cultural carryover. It wouldn't be the first time, as we know with the ancient Greeks, how much, well, they learned everything they needed to know in terms of philosophy from the Egyptians. So it's just only natural for them to borrow from the stories of the past, especially one that would have been in relative touch and distance. I think, in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the dates of the Kushite dynasty and the writing of Homer's Odyssey will almost overlap. I want to say will be kind of like almost contemporaneous. So that's quite interesting there. Anyway, thank you for sharing that. So let's quickly move on. So I guess we could start. No, we'll come on to the genetic data. I want to do the physical data first of all. So what we're going to look at is an article called 7 Faces from Grave Circle B at Mycenae. And these essentially are 7 cadavers that were dug up, of which one of them, F58 or Theta 58, I've called it F58 because I couldn't find a Theta key. F58 is the body of this woman who they've reconstructed and then sold to the rest of the world as being some relative of Helen of Troy. This is where they would have got it from. And when we go through this, you're going to see very quickly, A, why they chose this woman, B, if the initial reconstruction was any good, and C, how much of this actual process is scientific versus completely and utterly Eurocentric, wish fulfillment. You're going to be able to make that comparison and make that decision for yourself when you see this. Okay. So I want to read a quote here, and this quote is my quote. I wrote this down because this is exactly how I was feeling when I was reviewing the data. I said, from its inception, and what we're going to read, this article, this is the inception of the Manchester method. I said, from its inception, facial reconstruction has been designed as a tool to influence public perception without the interference of peer review or true academic scrutiny. Now, some of you are going to be surprised at that quote because you're going to be like, well, the academic world is biased anyway. And that's true. But I will say this. Academic scrutiny and peer review is something that is relatively democratized, i.e. anyone can do it. And I think in that world, people do like to challenge things in the academic world. And I can tell you right now, 99% of reconstructions will not stand up to any kind of scrutiny. So 99% of reconstructions do not go through this process. You will find no study linked to the paper. You will find a press release. You will find an article. Yeah, you will find like all of the reconstructions by Mr. Mycenae, etc. You will find an article, but you won't find a study that's in a peer-reviewed journal. I think the only one that I can think of that did go into a peer-reviewed journal, if I'm correct, the one that I can think of was the one done by Caroline Wilkerson, the Ramesses II. And I will be peer reviewing that when I'm in a position to do so. But they avoid it. They avoid the problems that come associated with that by just putting press out. So this is a tool to get stuff out because they know as soon as they can get stuff into the media and then give it a whiff of academic sign off, just like they've done here, where it's just someone playing around with Photoshop. And then they've got this doctor at the top who's not even a specialist in anything to do with anthropology, just kind of like a classicist who writes novels, but they've got her tick. Everyone goes, oh yes, this is the next advancement, digital reconstruction, this, that, and the other. And people don't read between the lines that this is literally none of the above. So this, I've given you this quote and we're going to go through the article together now because I think it's kind of important. We're going to kind of jump around. It's a long article, so we're not going to read it all. It was written in 1980, but we're going to get the important bits. And then when we've got the important bits, we're going to do a bit of comparison and we're going to have a bit of a laugh together, like I told you, because there's nothing to take too seriously here. And I don't mean that in any kind of like, when you see it, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. When we go through it, you're going to realize there's nothing to see here other than total, complete and utter deception at the hands of Eurocentrics. So let's jump in. So luckily enough, I was able to find the full article here. So I'm going to pop onto the screen. It is available on academia.edu, thankfully. Okay. And I'm not going to read the opening part. I mean, we can do, but this is kind of just talking about, gives you a bit of, I mean, the good thing about this here, in fact, I'm not going to go through that because it's kind of a little bit dry. So I'm going to just quickly dive in because it's not specifically about that woman, but you're going to get an overview of what they're doing here. So actually, let me just read from, okay, so I'm going to read from here. One could have produced, I'm reading from here, guys. One could have produced a composite shaft grave face based on the identifiable portions of several of the skulls, but this would have achieved little of serious academic value beyond the theoretical real face to set against the faces depicted in the art of the period. And in the end would have satisfied neither the standards of National Museum nor our own. So talking about the goal here, by the way, was to create the reconstructions. So let me carry on. This is not what serious facial reconstruction is about. Pay attention. There remained two other possibilities, however. The so-called mummy found in Schliemann in shaft grave 5 and the skeletons discovered in grave circle B. The mummy, which careful study of Schliemann's description and of the associated grave goods shows is neither Egyptian nor mummy, will be the subject of further study by Dr. Dimakapulu, that's the Greekest name I've ever come across, which will include a reconstruction if the remains justify it using computer-assisted X-ray techniques. If appropriate, to avoid subjecting what may be very fragile skull to the rigors of casting. The skulls from Circle B, however, were another matter. So that Circle B is the ones that are kind of in this study that we're talking about. And with enthusiastic blessing of late Professor G.E. Mylonas and the somewhat more cautious but nonetheless warm-hearted support of Professor Cypros Iakvidis, his colleague, and later his successor as the director of Mycenae excavations of the Archaeological Society, we received permission to study and, where possible, reconstruct the skulls from grave Circle B. So very quick overview of what the process here is in terms of they've got a grave and essentially they're going to be doing reconstructions on them, and we're going to have a very, very brief look at each one because it's going to be very eye-opening for you. Quick thank you to Jonathan Waters, who's given a $5 donation. He said, just like Beachy Head Lady. By the way, if you don't know who Beachy Head Lady is, I'm not going to post a spoiler now. Tune in tomorrow because we will be covering Beachy Head Lady as part of the Cheddar Man live stream that we're going to be doing. So please do tune in tomorrow and you'll get to know a bit more about what Mr. Waters is saying there. But thank you very much for your $5 donation. It is very much appreciated. Okay, so let's zoom through because we're not going to go into the ins and outs and this, the that's, the others. What we're going to do is we're just going to look very, 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 very objectively at what we're dealing with in terms of the raw material that they had to deal with. So we're not interested in the entire excavation. What we want to look at is the faces, the skulls. What were they coming up with here? What did they have to work with, etc., etc.? So here's our first skull. Okay, so this is skull Sigma 131. So this is skull Sigma 131. Now, without going into too much detail about this skull, let's just have a look at a few of the things that we can say with a degree of certainty. First thing is, skull Sigma 131 has a very wide nose. Okay, that is a very wide nasal passage. And to be clear, once again, if you haven't been on a live stream before, if you read through the kind of protocols behind forensic facial reconstruction, you'll know that the nasal passage determines around 60% of the final width of the nose. So if a nasal passage is this wide, as you can see, the nose will be essentially 40% larger from side to side. And as you can see, 40% larger, you're talking about really the width of the mouth, the width of kind of like an average mouth there. This nose is going to be relatively wide. So this is a wide nasal passage based on just that's a very basic kind of rule of forensic facial reconstruction. By the way, a rule that they break consistently. They set the rule and they break it consistently because when you dig up ancient skulls, you start realizing, hey, these people have all got really wide noses, and that's not really a Eurocentric trait. So they move away from it. You'll also notice that it's very prognathous. Anyone could see that. Okay. This has got a very prognathous maxilla region. Okay. The jaw is not attached, so you can put it where you want to, but you know, it's prognathous. It's got a wide nose. Straight away, we're getting, you know, in my mind, we're getting kind of like really African vibes going on here. Do we agree? Looking at this skull, I mean, I'm getting very African vibes from here. Now, let me make something clear about this entire live stream. I'm not going to make the proposition that all of these skulls are black. I'm not going to assume that, okay? Modern science has already assumed that, by the way. We're going to look at that tomorrow's live stream, but I'm not going to assume that. That's neither here nor there for me. The point I'm making is I want you to look at the detail behind the skull, and then I want you to look at what they came up with. And then I want you to make a decision if you think they've made a rational, well-informed anthropological choice, or if they've made a political choice. That's what I want you to come up with here. Okay. So you can have a look at this skull and you can kind of like get a feel for what it's like. All right. They tend to give you a good amount of data with each one that you can kind of read through. So let's just have a look at here. Yeah, Sigma 131. So I'm just going to say the technique of reconstruction has now been described on several occasions, and it's not necessary to repeat it here. The first skull from grave circle B to be reconstructed was Sigma 131, largely because he was the only one of those we had selected for casting who still had his mandible. So you'll find a lot of them, mandible is the lower jaw, by the way. A lot of them, in fact, all of them don't have their mandible apart from this one. And by the way, when they don't have the mandible, notice that they will always, as much as possible, assume or enforce retrographism. And retrographism is the recession of the lower jaw. Because the more the lower jaw recedes, the more you can force a prognathic face into looking flat, i.e. orthognathic, or looking retrographic, which is what you find in the true European. So you know they like to say the true Negro. Well, the true European is retrographic. The true European. Okay? If we're going to talk about the true European, that's what they try to create. They try and push it as much as possible. Let's get rid of that wide nose, make it as narrow as possible so that it falls in line with the true European. Okay? I don't think it's someone just said dolichocephaly. I don't think it's dolichocephalic. Just looking at it right now, it looks like it might be brachycephalic. Once again, that's neither here nor there. The entire Andaman Islanders, they're all brachycephalic. Okay, and they are all very black people. Okay, the dolichocephaly can be present. Okay, but it's not always present amongst black people. But the other traits are really strong, so it doesn't even need those. Okay, so let's the first so blah blah blah, the mandible, yeah, but it was also appropriate to begin with him because he was perhaps the founder of the dynasty that built the Mycenae of the grave circles. If Schliemann believed he had found Agamemnon in grave circle A, then this should have been Pelops. All right, so I'm gonna kind of move on from there. You guys getting a feel for how he looks like? Let's move on. Let's move on. So here's our next skull. Okay. So this is Z59. Okay. And once again, I want you to have a look at this skull. This is a very tall skull. Okay. It's a very tall skull. The nose is not particularly wide, but what it does have is it has a very long kind of maxillary region. Okay. And the height of the forehead, can you see how the forehead slopes down really suddenly? This is kind of a very common phenotype amongst East Africans. A very, very, very kind of common phenotype amongst East African. Like people just said, they have kind of like that overjetting prognathous maxillary region, okay, which is sloping forward. But I did get very, very strong East African looking vibes from this, particularly with the forehead. Okay. But that being said, once again, I'm not going to make assumptions about race or groupings here. I'm just showing you the traits, telling you things that I find familiar and things that I don't find familiar, and letting you see what the reconstructions are. Okay. Because what I don't want to do is start, I'm not going to sit here and say they're all, but I'm not. That's not the purpose of this live stream. Please, 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 please understand that is not the purpose of this live stream. Okay. So that's the second one, Z59. Let's move on. Here's the third. And by the way, they do deteriorate from here. So this is Theta 51. Okay. And you can see we're not dealing with a lot here. We have, to me, a very, well, wouldn't say very, but quite a strongly protruding occipital region. That's the rear of the skull over here. That's hooking. Okay. That's sticking out. All right. That's a hooking skull. Now, hooking skulls are relatively rare, once again, I would say, amongst kind of modern Europeans. We also have a very large and wide nasal region. Okay. It's a very large and wide nasal region. It's actually quite wide, particularly with how narrow the teeth are. So in terms of how narrow the teeth are and the width, this nose, when it's in completion, will be as wide as the mouth. Okay, will be as wide as the mouth. This actually reminds me a little bit of the skull of Akhenaten in terms of this nasal passage. So this is quite that's a large nasal cavity in terms of its width and its length. Okay, so this is going to be quite a dominant nose. All right. Once again, just take that in. Okay. Figure out what you want to figure out from there. Just have a look at it. See what it says to you in terms of character. This, once again, the back of that head is very large and it hooks. Okay. Let's carry on. Now, this is where it gets very theoretical. Now, this skull, I would say, we're definitely leaning more towards the dolichocephalic type. Because we have a skull that's narrow from the front and relatively long, almost very long from the side. Okay. Once again, we have prognathism in terms of the shape of the teeth. Okay. With prognathism, we don't have a lower jaw, so we don't know how that kind of like expressed itself. And we have a moderate size nose. I would say kind of like this nose would be very similar in width to my nose. Finalized once you added the extra 40% to give you the total width. Okay, just letting you kind of like putting that one out there, letting you see that one. Okay, and let's move on. Now this is where it gets very theoretical. Okay, this one, I think the only thing you could pick out about this skull, like, it looks pretty much close to being dolichocephalic, if not definitely dolichocephalic. It's very long. So we have a long skull here, okay? But that's it. We have the top of the eye sockets. Everything else is gone. A big gaping miss there. Yeah, a big gaping miss there. So there's not really much going on here with this one. And it's important that you see this as well, how little is here, because when you see the conclusions they came up with, you'll be, let's just say you'll be shocked / entertained. And then this is Theta 55. So this is the brother. Remember we talked about earlier about the fact that the mummy they did the skeleton they did a reconstruction of. This is the brother. Okay, so this is the brother who they assumed was the husband first of all. And this is just, you can't really say anything about this. This is just incomplete. Okay, it's very much incomplete. We have almost very little to nothing to make other than the fact that it has a little bit of the nasal bone region. I mean, anyone with integrity would say, I can't really make a reconstruction from this. That's what I think an integral person would say, you know, with the best technique possible. We don't know what this person's face looked like. You know, if this was a war and someone cut off the bottom half of someone's face, would you claim to be able to reconstruct what that person's face looked like if you had no reference? Just think of that. Think about a war and someone's come and the entire bottom of their face has been cut off by an axe. And then someone comes along and goes, oh, well, based on the top of their head, I can guess what the bottom of their head looked like. Yeah. Yeah. Because that's what we'd be doing here if we made a reconstruction from this, wouldn't it? Yeah. It's a bit wild, isn't it? Let's carry on. The final one we have. Okay, so this is that shield thing that they mentioned. Okay, the electrum mask buried with I-55. Okay, which they thought belonged to him, and now they're thinking belonged to her. But this is the electrum mask. Okay, let's scroll down. This, everybody, is Theta 58. This is the skull that they reconstructed Helen of Troy with. Yeah. This is the skull. Now, the first thing I'm going to point out is that this skull shape looks very similar to the Thutmose dynasty of ancient Egypt. Very similar. This skull shape is something that you will find very, very commonly amongst like the Samburu. Okay, we don't have a face here. Like everyone just said, there's no nose, there's no face. It has about 6 teeth. We have no idea. We can even see just from the very little that's left that this was clearly prognathic, because if you look at where the side teeth are, they're already ahead of the front of the face. Okay, so the front teeth would have been out here. It looks like it would have been heavily prognathic. They won't try and reflect that. This is a faceless, like, integrity would say we can't make a reconstruction here, wouldn't it? anyone with any ounce of integrity would say we cannot make a reconstruction from this. But we are not dealing with integrity here, people. We're dealing with Eurocentrism. So anything is possible. You see impossible reconstruction. Eurocentric sees blank canvas. Okay, that's what they see. This is a blank canvas. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to rebuild the face of the Trojans and to give back to this once thriving civilization who, you know, through years of decomposition have lost their face. We will use our ingenuity to tell you what that face once looked like. This is this is not integrity, people. Okay, this is not integrity. They are literally creating faces from nothing, and I can't wait to show you what those faces look like, by the way, because I'm sure you guys must be eager on the edge of your seats to see what they came up with. Yeah, but I will go back to the fact that I will go back and point out the fact that this head shape, yeah, people, this head shape, that is, in fact, let me just pull up Samburu, because people right now think I'm just gassing. I will pull up a head shape right now in Africa that is just like that. I'm just in Google right now. It won't take me any time. Okay. And when I pull this up, there you go. I told you it would take me seconds to do this. Literally seconds to do this. Because it's so common and so easy for me to find that I don't have to look for it very long. Okay. I'm going to pull up a couple. So the head shape you'll see in here, let me just quickly open image in new tab. Oh, I said open image in new tab. Try again. Open image in new tab. There we go. So the head shape you're seeing here, this is it. That's the head shape you're seeing there. Okay, really common African head shape. Okay. Let me show you another one in case that angle kind of doesn't do it justice. Here's another good one. And I'm sure you guys, if you have a look, you'll be able to have a little bit more time to get an exact version of it. Here's another version. Let me zoom in. This is that head shape. Okay, it's a really, really common African head shape that you're seeing there. Okay, that is. Would you debate that that's the same head shape that you're seeing there? Even if you look at the prognathism of the teeth, just that kind of like very mild leaning of the maxillary there. Yeah, in comparison to what you're seeing is trying to express itself here. Okay, that's not me reaching. That's me finding in literally 10 seconds. Yeah, well, not 10 seconds, it could be about a minute, literally a minute, the exact head shape. Okay, now the reason I say it like that is ask a Eurocentrist to do the same. Ask a Eurocentrist to do the same. Go and ask a Eurocentrist. Okay, cool. You're saying these were European people. Find me one right now who has the head shape. Watch how long they'll make you wait. Okay, they won't. Okay, they absolutely will not. All right. So this is what I want to show you. You've seen the skulls now. So that's the 7 skulls, by the way, guys. 7 skulls that are part of this study. Now, I'm sure you guys are very, very eager. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at the reconstructions. Okay, we're going to have a bit of fun now. Okay, so should we start? Let's start off with Sigma 131. So here is the reconstruction of Sigma 131. What do you think, guys? Go on, I need some feedback from you guys. What do you think of Sigma 131? Please, by all means, have a laugh, okay? We've earned it today. I really feel like we've earned it. Have a laugh. Now, in fairness to them, the width of the nose, yeah, the width of the nose has, I want to say not quite, but it's almost being adhered to. But the way they got around with acknowledging the fact that this person has a wide and very flat nose, by the way, you could tell by the fact that you've got very little reach on the nose bridge, is they've created this inexplicably long point, which makes look like he's a witch. Yeah, this is why it looks like he has a witch's nose, because they've had to acknowledge the fact that this is a wide nasal passage, even though they've made it narrower than it should do. They've had to acknowledge the fact it's a wide nasal passage without wanting to acknowledge this is clearly an African or a black person, I should say. So they've tried to point the nose as much as possible. These are the kind of tricks they do. Notice how all of the prognathism that we saw has been disappeared as much as possible. The age-old tilt the skull trick has been used, but also with the elongation of the nose, the bottom of the nose probably sits around here really close to the teeth. And as a result, you end up hiding a lot of that prognathism. This is just, it's just Eurocentrism, 101. Take a clearly, in my view, clearly African skull. Yeah. Give it a witch's nose and just slap on as much meat as possible until it no longer looks African. This is what we're dealing with here. Right. So anyway, this is Sigma 131. Yeah. Hope you're enjoying that. And they have some really funny summaries and write-ups. We'll go through some of those later. Should we move on to the next one? All right. A62. So this is A62, the faceless one. Look at A62. Yeah, all we have is the top of his skull. Let's be straight. All we have is the top of his skull. They could have put any face down here, guys. Come on. Come on. They could have put any face down here. And remember what I said? The true European, they will always go for orthographic. Look how flat that is from the top of the brow to the bottom of the chin. You could put a ruler down there. They will always go for orthographic. That's the true European. How do you make a European, or how do we define something as European? You can see what they do when they get the opportunity. This is what they'll do. Okay. This is nothing scientific about this process. This is just purely, we will do whatever the hell we want to do. We've created a maxilla. We've created a mandible. We've created most of the zygomatic region. That's the cheeks. We've basically done what we can. Oh, and by the way, let's ignore the really long head here, that really long Central African head shape that this clearly had. Let's ignore that completely. Yeah. And let's just build up as much as we can as possible to kind of like smooth and bracky the head out as much as possible. You know how they do. Stephen, thank you very much for your $20 donation. He said, race is a political designation / social contract. It stands to reason that Eurocentric anthropological research will always consider the political designations before good faith, objective, and scholarship. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I cannot argue with that one bit. And thank you very much for your $20 donation. But you can see here, and bear in mind, this was written in the 1980s as well. This is when Eurocentrists had carte blanche. Yeah, absolute carte blanche over the academic world. Very little scrutiny, very little interest would have come from anyone outside of the European community, particularly since they are dealing with a European civilization. That's why they get away with this. No one's put these works under scrutiny before. No one's looked at them. But to be honest with you, it might shoot them in the foot doing this latest reconstruction, because now a lot of people are going to, at least you'd hope, revisit some of these works and say, are these based on anything? If you've done a reconstruction based on this reconstruction, was that original reconstruction any good? I think you guys can see we're 2 reconstructions in, and I think you guys can see what the agenda here is. Okay, you can see what the agenda is here. Let's move on to the next ones are 3 together. So these are 3 reconstructions side by side. You guys ready? Yeah, let's go. I'm gonna have to just hide your donation there, Stephen. Thank you very much for that. Let's go. So this is Z59, theta 51, and B 52. So here's Z59 at the top here. They haven't honored the, I want you to look at something here. Look at the size of the cranium, yeah, in respect to the rest of the face here. This, I would say, has relatively small forehead. This has a humongous forehead. So what exactly is going on here? They've wanted to shrink the features. Remember, we talked about how long this nose was, okay, in comparison to the next one as well, which they've done the same thing. To avoid having to give the nose its true length and width, okay, i.e. its very dominant place on the face, they've shrunk all the features and made the forehead look much larger. Okay, this means this is not in proportion at all. You guys can see that by just looking at the skull. This is not proportionate to the reconstruction they've made. And they've done exactly the same thing for this middle one over here. Once again, relatively small forehead. Remember, we talked about how large and wide that nose is. This doesn't even obey the 60% rule. This nose is literally as wide as the nasal cavity. You guys can see that, right? Yeah. This nose is as wide as the nasal cavity. The nose should be 40% wider. So this is not even trying to be accurate. This is a team of people who knows they're not going to be brought under scrutiny. Now, in fairness, they can do with the mandible, the lower jaw, what they want. Okay, the mandible doesn't exist. This is carte blanche to them. This is what we spoke about earlier. This is blank canvas. Okay, they love it. But what have they done is they've not honored any of the, like people are saying, the prognathism. They've not honored any of the features that were on the skull. They've just literally just slapped clay on top and used the skull as a rough guide without acknowledging any of the features. This nasal passage should have presented a much wider nose than what we have here. And they haven't bothered. And this final one, I'd say, is the own, well, this one is closer, but still looks out of proportion to the skull. But at least this one's marginally closer. Out of the three, this one has some resemblance to the skull and to where the features should be and how large the features should be. I mean, just for comparison, look at the width of this nose in comparison to the width of the nasal cavity here. This one has a wider nasal cavity and a narrower and smaller nose. How is that possible? How can this one have a larger proportionate nose with that nasal passage in comparison to this one, who should have had a massive nose? Yeah, I'm sure you guys can see this is total fraud. Okay, this is absolute and total fraud. Let's carry on, because now we're going to move on to the reconstruction. This is where it gets really, really good. Okay, so this is finally, we're going to move on to theta 58, which is our reconstruction lady. Okay, so this is the reconstruction they came up with. Remember African head lady over here? Yeah, African head lady over here. Let's just 1 second. Did I hide the African head? I want to pull it up again. Just to be clear, African head lady, yeah, over here. This is what they came up with for African head lady. All right. Now, the one thing I will say is the reconstruction they've came up with, I can see how they kind of got this from this. Now, obviously, they're working with a completely fabricated, fallacious starting point. We know that, okay? The starting point is a joke, right? There's no one here gonna debate that. They've completely, remember, next slide, okay? This is the blank canvas they were working with, okay? This is what they were working with. What have they done? What are we speaking about again, guys? Once again, true European, or the true Indo-European, I should say. Notice how On the two situations when they had absolutely no face, they landed on exactly the same features. Once again, we'll talk about look at the forced retrographism. Look how much they've tilted the skull in order to force her chin backwards and make her retrographic. Look how they've done that, even though they had nothing to fear here. But even look, they didn't want to put the flat top of her skull. They didn't want to make that the top of her skull because they still had to obey the fact that she's clearly prognathic. So what do? We tilt the skull. Because the front of the face is missing, we can tilt the skull pretty much as we like. Yeah, and bear in mind the teeth are flat here. We spoke about this. The fact that the teeth are sitting flat means the face sits flat because your teeth sit horizontal in your mouth. They've tilted it up so the teeth will be moving up. They did the same thing with King Tutankhamun, as we know. And lo and behold, we get rid of all of the prognathism. And bear in mind, they didn't do any rebuilding of the front of the teeth, it looks like. I also want you to notice this, guys, really quickly. Look at the facial features. Look at the facial features of the other one that had no face. Do you notice something? They're identical, aren't they? Yeah, true European. When they've got no data getting in their way, when they've got no anthropology getting in their way, they are defaulting to a facial type. And at least they expose themselves in that. This is the face of the true European. Like I said, orthognathic to retrognathic. Okay. The features all fall in line with what they see as being a true European face. Even the nose is identical. Okay. So can you see how they've kind of like defaulted to a facial type there? They like to push out this idea of true Negroid, but they don't ever like to talk about the fact, well, what do you think a true European or true Indo-European or true white looks like, or true Caucasian? They don't want to talk about that, but this is what they have in mind when they think of a true European. Let's ignore the African head shape, by the way. Let's ignore the hook head. Ignore that completely. Yeah. So as you can see that the reconstruction they came up with here, I can see how they got to here from here. I can see that. Okay. The problem is here is a complete and utter fraud. That is the problem. The one thing I can't see is any justification for the red hair, any justification for the blue eyes, any justification for the pale skin. And what you noticed in the article that we read earlier is they made it sound like DNA, digital reconstruction, anthropology had all fed in to this process, this new face that they created. And yet there's no justification whatsoever. In fact, we're going to read the DNA study very briefly after this before we wrap up. Let's just quickly have a look at this, what it used to be. This is Faith 58. So this is, once again, this reconstruction. Let's read this. This is going to make you laugh, guys. Condition. Bone apparently better preserved than in some of the other skulls. So this is on the paper, yeah? Color. Generally dark brown. I'm talking about the bone here, obviously, not the skin or anything like that. It doesn't have any skin, it's just bone. Cerebra orbitalia, none. So that's the orbit. Okay, there's no orbit. Increased trabeculation, thickened cranial diplore. Yes, some vault, 8 millimeters thick, possibly as much as 10 millimeters in places. So they're talking about the vault, basically the upper skull. Okay, much of the upper part right of the midline completely missing, left half virtually complete, much of the posterior and inferior parts of the right parietal present. So the parietal is the top of the skull. Okay, so much of the right of the skull is there, the left is missing, big old chunk missing on the left parietal. Occipital bone virtually complete. The occipital is the rear of the skull. So they're talking about, remember that hook head that we could all see? That's virtually complete. Base, not well represented, but basilar portion of occipital and glenoid fossae present. Much of the sphenoid missing. Both temporals virtually complete. Face, central portions missing. Now, that's an understatement, isn't it? No nasal bones. No nasal processes of maxilla. The face is a gaping chasm. So you can see here they're quite open about the fact that this is not something that you should be working with. Okay. Right zygomatic, nearly complete. So that's over here. The right zygomatic is, they got some there. I mean, it's missing the front. I would say the zygomatic minor is missing, but right zygomatic nearly complete. Left zygomatic fully complete. I'm not seeing that. Okay, I'm not seeing that at all. Maxilla, upper medial nasal portions missing, palatine and dental portions present. Now the funny part is when you look at the article, they say something along the lines of, this is good for reconstruction. In fact, I will just find the quote for you quickly. Let's go back to the article because we had it up, didn't we? This part's quite funny. So let's have a look at see what they say when it comes to. Have I got it open? I thought I had it open. Maybe it's open another window. So bear with me one moment. Trying to see where I had the article open. It was academia, wasn't it? EDU. Here it is. Okay. Thanks for that. All right, so let me let me make you laugh, okay? Or at least this tickled me, but I've got a very dry sense of humor, so you know what they say, if you don't laugh, you cry. Here it is, I-58. Sorry, I should say theta 58. That's not it. Where is it? Where is it? Okay, so these are the reconstructions all summarized. We're looking at them together. By the way, they got versions with hair. I was actually saving that for a bit of comedy with you guys, but I wanted to, where is it? Okay, here it is. Here it is. Sorry about that, guys. I just wanted to take you through this really quickly because this made me laugh. So this is where what I was just reading out to you. Now here, reconstruction, original conservation and restoration look sound. Sorry, come on, bro. How does that not make you laugh? Original conservation and restoration look sound. Yeah, these guys. what about it is sound? You've just made a face up. You've listed all the fact that the entire face is missing. The face is a chasm, but then at the end of it, you've gone, looks sound. Looks sound. What do you think, guys? Yeah, we've really nailed it this time. Well done, spot on, guys. Unfaultable. Come on, man. This is a joke. This is literally a joke. This is not. There's nothing academic about this process, guys. I'm sure you can see that and agree with that. There's nothing academic about this process. They are literally slapping clay, and sometimes not even accurately, onto heads. Some of those heads look drastically bigger than the skulls. Someone needs to explain that to me. You know, someone needs to explain exactly what's going on here. It's absolutely wild. Let's finish the presentation. Let me quickly just pull that up again. Okay, so here we are. So this is her brother, by the way, Theta 55. Okay, once again, look at the facial typism, guys. Remember what I said to you? Okay, completely orthognathic. I would say slightly retrognathic. Can you see the jaw recedes behind the front of the head or the top of the forehead? It recedes behind. That's retrognathism. We saw all of the skulls. We didn't see a single retrognathic skull. We all agreed, just on basic perusal, that all of those skulls, based on the top of their head being flat, were prognathic. Mildly prognathic, most of them. Couple of them, like the first one, strongly prognathic. But they were all prognathic. But they've managed to make retrognathic reconstructions out of all of them. So this is what they made that from, by the way. They have it oriented properly here, but they know they can't orient it like that for the final reconstruction, even though they had carte blanche. Look where the nose bridge was poking out. Okay, what happened to that? What happened to that? Look over here. You can see the way the nose bridge pokes out there. Let's have a read. Condition, not too bad. Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, guys, condition not. Sorry. Let me carry on. I should stop amusing myself. Light with dark stains. The remains comprise almost complete cranial vault. Yeah, that's fair. Almost complete. Both parietal's upper part of occipital and much of the temporal bone is preserved. Also, the nasal bones and fragments of each zygomatic complete. So they've got, I guess, in a world where you're enjoying freedom of expression and creativity, this is ideal. So I guess that's why they're, oh, we like this one, not too bad. I can work with this. Leave it to me. But there's nothing there. No, leave it with me. I've got this. I think I could just work by magic. I can guess what the rest of the face look like. Complete. Oh, yeah, exactly. Dentition and right maxillary teeth. I don't see any of that. And by the way, I've definitely referenced the right one. This is definitely Theta 55. Where? I don't see any of that. Comments. Reconstruction has suffered. The wiring has gone. Mandible is missing. Much of the face is now missing to judge from. Okay, I'm going to quickly go back because I don't like the way it said teeth. Okay. And there's clearly no teeth here. So I'm just going to quickly make sure I've got the right one, because what I don't want to do is have people pulling me up later and say you were critiquing the wrong one there. So let me just quickly pull the article up and make sure I got that Theta 55 that we were looking at. Sorry, guys. Let me just quickly do this before we wrap up, because we're very close to finishing now, by the way. Boom, boom, boom. So this is Theta 58. Yep. Okay. Yep, there it is, guys. You can see it there. Skull of Theta 55. Okay. I'm not making it up. This is it. Okay. And those notes that I was just reading were definitely from Theta 55. Okay. So actually, does that say I-50? Let me just double check. So I'm just going to go back to, sorry guys, just to double check again. I want to be as thorough as possible. Make sure I'm not making my error there, because I can find and acknowledge that mistake now than later. Okay, so oops. Okay, so Theta 58. Yep, that's definitely Theta 58 there. Yeah. Theta 55. Maxillary teeth. So I haven't got that. I definitely have not got that wrong. I've just double checked that live to make sure that I haven't accidentally pulled up data on the wrong one. Okay, yeah, definitely didn't get that wrong. Sorry about that, guys. Just wanted to make sure that I was correct there. So let's go back to the presentation. Now, it says condition not too bad anyway. So this is her brother and her with hair. And we're going to go through all of them with hair, because this is the part that's really going to make you laugh. Okay, guys? So this is the reconstructions with hair. Now, what I found really funny about this is they have done their darndest to make these look European. And I think we can all agree, if this one over here had Afro hair, yeah, it's like, come on. If this one had, what they've done, and I'm going to quickly show you all of the reconstructions with hair, is they've given them all straight hair, which you can imagine why they've done that. It's the assumption, obviously, that all of these people are white in their head regardless. But even with the hair, they're still struggling. This is going to be linked to the shape of the face, the shape of the cheeks, the zygomatic region. These aren't normal outside of melanated people, and this is why they are even struggling with all of that deception you saw going on with those reconstructions, for them not to look like Africans. If we look at the rest of them, I want to show you all of them with hair. They're just down here, we're right next to it. So this is the reconstructions bald. We've seen those. Let's look at the reconstructions of hair. Here's that first one. Remember, Mr. Africa. Oh, my stream. Let's go. I lost my stream for a second there. Look at the hair they gave him there. Look at this guy over here. I mean, yeah, look at the hairstyles. And obviously, anyone can see what they're trying to do. This one over here, I think they failed once again. This is another fail. I don't think it matters how you swing this one, what kind of hair you try and put on this one. This is, you know where you're going with this. Yeah. When you've got someone who has overjetting teeth, okay, you've got a choice to either make the maxillary region long or to make the top lip large to hide it. Those are your two choices. So you're either going to deal with a long maxillary region, i.e. that part's lengthened, which is a very African trait anyway, or you make the lip a little bit larger. And they've kind of look with faces. Is my internet keep falling down? Keep going to loading. Yeah, with faces that just don't look quite right, do they? They don't look quite right. So yeah. Let's now quickly have a look at the DNA, and then we're going to wrap this up because this is we've got through, had a bit of a laugh, but I think we can kind of wrap up this study now, and you can see where this came from. If you haven't hit the likes, how are we doing? 203 likes. Okay, we're doing okay. Got 214 present at the moment, so a few of you did drop off. That's absolutely fine. Let's just pull up the DNA, and then we'll wrap up this stream. So let me quickly grab the DNA results. So here we are. It looks like the streamer is dropping down and loading every now and then. Just let me know, guys, that the stream is okay for all of you, or if I'm losing reception. Hit the like button if you haven't done that already. Show the stream some love. Okay, so this is the DNA study, and this was conducted in 2008. This wasn't obviously done when the reconstructions were done. We don't have a lot to read here. In fact, reading the abstract will be aptly than the in fact this study is very similar to the study that Hawass done in 2008. So I don't know if there was a cluster of kind of pathology studies that took place in 2008, and maybe this was a part of it. I don't know. Maybe it was just kind of a new wave. That also, the fact that it was done in 2008 does kind of, in fact, let's just read through it really quickly, read through the abstract, because this will tell us everything we need. So kinship between burials from revealed by ancient DNA typing. Let me give a quick thank you actually to Latel Lafraise. Thank you very much. There was no comment there, but I appreciate you. A long time support of the channel. You are very much appreciated. Let's read through really quickly because there's not a lot here and there's not really much above it. It says the richness of the burials in grave circle B at Mycenae, Greece indicates that 35 people interred there held elite status during their lifetimes 3,500 years ago. It's been speculated that the group's burials represent different dynasties or branches of the same family. To test this hypothesis, we carried out an exhaustive ancient DNA, aDNA, so that's autosomal DNA, study of 22 of the skeletons. We were unable to identify nuclear aDNA in any specimen, but we obtained authentic mitochondrial aDNA sequences for 4 of the individuals. So mitochondrial DNA will give us the uniparental lineages down the maternal line. The results were compared with facial. I want to highlight this quickly. The results were compared with facial reconstructions, because what I want to highlight here is what happens in Eurocentrism, and it kind of really ties nicely to what I said at the very start of the stream, is that what you're dealing with in Eurocentrism is you're dealing with a faulty foundation. And as a result of this faulty echo chamber, which from its inception, in fact, I'm going to read my quote again because I think it's very relevant to what we're discussing right now. I'm just going to quickly pull up that quote that I said to you earlier. I think it's very relevant. I said, from its inception, facial reconstruction, okay, has been designed like Eurocentrism as a tool to influence public perception without interference of academic or true academic scrutiny. I hope you guys aren't losing me too much because I keep getting loading on my StreamYard and I'm worried about if this is streaming nicely. So the point being that when it comes to Eurocentrism, just going back to the article that we're reading, when it comes to Eurocentrism, what you get is this really faulty sounding board. Okay, the very first study that has been conducted is false. Do people check that study? Do they put it through a rigorous test? Do they analyze it and critique it? Do they make sure that before they take their Hegelian approach to build and synthesize new conclusions? No, they don't. They just take whatever claptrap has been handed down from the last Eurocentrists and be like, it's good. It's good. Let's build upon this. It says the results were compared with facial reconstructions. Those are the same facial reconstructions that we've just looked at and interpreted within the archaeological context of isolation. DNA is never interpreted in isolation. I hate the fact that it's buffering. This is really annoying because I think I've got good internet. Sorry about this, guys. DNA is never taken in isolation. Okay, it's always taken. It needs or requires an anthropological. This is really frustrating me. It needs. I'm going to wrap the stream up soon because it's buffering. And I don't know why. But it needs an anthropological framework to make sense so people can understand what came first, the chicken or the egg. This data that I'm giving me, this relationship, who brought it to where. This is, guys, I'm going to wrap this up now. I think it's buffering a lot and it's kind of ruining the stream. So I don't want to fight through it because I've kind of said what I wanted to say. The only thing that we're going to find from here is that Theta 55 and Theta 58 were related, but there were no decisions about ethnicity, complexion, or what these these people would have looked like in DNA. So on that note, guys, I'm not going to win this battle against my buffering stream. I don't know why it's doing that. I don't think it has anything to do with my internet. But had a fantastic show, guys, and I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Hit up the likes before you go. If anything, I can tack on what we've discussed here in our stream tomorrow, because I'm tackling kind of like, this is a good launch point for him anyway, and it's buffering again. So thanks, guys. Have a fantastic evening. I will see you all tomorrow. Hit up the likes. Keo, I think you're one of the only people it's not buffering for. It's good to have you here, but don't worry, it's fine. We kind of got to the end anyway. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that it was informative for you, and I will see you on tomorrow's live stream. Have a fantastic one. Peace. Sorry to all of the being Latal, Phrase, Stephen, Carter, Who was that? Sorry, everything's freezing for me now. Macy. I'll go through all them. Jonathan, Kimberly, Jonathan again. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it.